Well, hello, and welcome to the Cellar. We have some very interesting questions tonight, so I'm going to get right to it. First, I have some questions related to the creation of the cleric, thief, and elf classes. All right, we may have a problem right now. What are the ideas behind expanding classes beyond just fighting man and magic user? Well, the cleric was always one of the original three. So we got a problem there. The cleric, the fighting man, as he was then called, or the fighter, and the magic user. Why they made elves into classes, I have no idea. I wasn't there. I had nothing to do with that. As to why thieves were separate from fighting men, and which this is one of the things asked by this individual, because a lot of the early things were based on archetypes, and Kugel the Clever, as well as the Mouser, and even Conan in his way, were thieves. Now, to say Conan had thieving abilities, well, yeah, according to Robert E. Howard, Conan could do everything. However, if we get to something that's a little less fantastical, then thieving is an art, but it's also highly dangerous. So, if they were going to go that direction, then be a thief and take the chance of getting the poison needle or the blow dart in the gut coming out of the hole in the mosaic on the wall that you failed to notice. They were following archetypes, not necessarily individual fictional characters. Yeah, Mouser could fight, but he fought at a disadvantage being small, made up for by being quick, etc. Not going to go into the individual things there. But they were following archetypes and stereotypes, if you will. And that's why Gary did it the way he did. There's another question later on that deals with why Gary did some of the things he did. Let's see, what else? Yeah, that's enough of that. No, they're not fighters with special skills in breaking and entering. On high-level characters, one of the things I love about a lot of old-school games is a tendency for the progression of characters to drop off at around level 9 to 10. Most classes stop getting hit dice and just get a few hit points, spell progression slows, and the attack and save tables only go so far. If I want, I can allow campaigns to go on into the double-digit levels without having to escalate the challenges from what they were taking on at around level 8 because the characters don't keep growing in power indefinitely. Things stay grounded. That's a very good point, very good observation. At the time, now it may surprise you why we did it that way. We simply didn't foresee at the beginning, supplements obviously address that, we simply didn't, I can't take credit for this or blame. Gary and Dave didn't foresee characters going beyond 8th, 9th level, 10th, which is why they retired. That was in the third, I believe it was the third book in the original Three Little Brown Books, was about retiring. Simply just didn't didn't grasp in their mindsets, didn't grasp what would be the fun of getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The fun was in the struggle, getting there. I know that to be both of their, one of, an underlying principle for both of them. To which degree each took it is, I'm not going to go into, but I do know that both of them saw that. And they just, why would anybody want to be any bigger than that? Because the framework of the game, at that point that was written, the baddest thing you could face was a dragon. Okay, think about it. The nastiest creature you could come up against was a dragon. It was in strategic review and dragon and stuff that things like mind flayers and that came about. They weren't encompassed in the design and the worldview of the designers at that time. So yeah, they stayed grounded, but it's almost by accident. Okay, there's been a lot of new games drawing on Appendix and Sources directly for their inspiration. I can think of Modiphius's Conan, Goodman Games' Longmar, and their upcoming Dying Earth box sets. I've been trying to find and read more Appendix N material, though sometimes it can be difficult to find those stories if they haven't been reprinted in some kind of omnibus edition. I just wanted to ask, what's your favorite entry from Appendix N? Or top 3 at least. Well, thank you for that. Because I can't pick a favorite. I can tell you which of them had the most influence on starting to develop my concept of fantasy. When I was a kid, 10 to 13, 14, there were a lot of sword and sandal movies, mostly Italian, not very well acted, but lots of big oily guys running around and Italian women you'd never heard of before, and they had some cheesy special effects and a lot of sword fighting, and I ate those up, sword and sandals. So then I went into fantasy. Now, I'm going to give you 2 lists of 3, though there is an overlap. 3 favorite authors that influenced me the most on where I went into in fantasy have to be Robert E. Howard, Fritz Leiber, and Jack Vance. In terms of what I read, when I read them, those 3 had the most influence. Now, when it comes to stories or single books, Poul Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lines. Time travel, anachronist, a man out of his time, fascinating. L. Sprague de Camp, the Harold Shea books, for the same reason. Man out of his element, going back into different dimensions, forward and back and everything. Wow, what a neat concept. And then the overlap is Howard, just about any Conan story. Because there were no Conan novels. There were just Conan stories. And he was the ultimate sword and sorcery. Even before Schwarzenegger, when Howard described him, you just saw this great big bulgy muscly guy. The fact that it became Arnold Schwarzenegger was amazing, wasn't it? So those are the ones that had the most profound influence in forming and shaping where I went. Okay, now I'm only going into this topic again because this is a good example of a viewpoint. Why XP for gold is good. My players had a loose plan to rescue the kobolds in 2 days. These are the social workers, as he calls them, from last week, or a few weeks ago, actually. And they'd bought the supplies to do the labor. Down in the dungeon, they'd cracked a safe open with a crowbar, finding inside enough gems to unknowingly level them up. Wandering around a bit, they came to the metal door to the dwarven section of the area and guessed the password. Didn't roll to guess it, flat out said what I had in my notes from weeks ago. The guards let them in, not wanting to upset their captain, and once inside, my players sneak around until they find a chest. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Don't you just love it when they just simply walk in and do the improbable right thing after all the crafty stuff you devised? Well, you can see what it did to me. The thief picked it open to find just as many gems again. Knowing we play with XP for gold, they took the gems, knowing they would risk ruining the whole plan by doing this. They quickly make a string of lies to the kobolds and get them all to scurry out of the dungeons, with no plan of what to do with the monsters now, but with 2 fistfuls of gemstones. After the game, I asked the players would they have passed on the gems if they didn't earn XP for them. They said they agreed, saying they wouldn't have ruined the whole deal otherwise. That's why I like XP for gold. It ties the players' greed for XP to characters' greed for gold pieces. If you give significant XP for any action, that action has become what the players will do. Give too much XP for killing monsters, and your players will chase everything down. True. Too much XP for character development, and they'll push to the spotlight as often as they can. But maybe Monster Slayers and having a more role-playing heavy game works for your table. So those rules will work for you. Your table will vary. And that's good. That's a great ending. Your table may vary. I try to remember every week to say, you can do it 100 different ways. I generally just, when asked, this is my opinion. And okay, it works. Your group's mindset, that works. And that's wonderful. They set out on a mission, they fulfill the mission to the letter. Wonderful. Great. Good group. Hold on to them. Okay, after some years playing D&D-based RPGs, I learned and found I like Thaco. Good for you. 2-hit, armor class 0, in case you don't know the acronym. Is there anybody who doesn't? I have found that it's a simple concept, especially if you use universal combat matrix, a simple grid with numbers, but in basic advanced D&D, first and second, each class and most depth monsters had slightly differing combat matrix, plural, matrices, yes. And newcomers or players experienced in the WotC editions after 2000 found Thaco complex, mainly because the gaming pop culture since 2000 said that Thaco was complex. When I started playing old school role-playing games, I decided to stop using the term Thaco and just tell them what to roll on the attack. Till next time, have a nice time. Thank you, I will. Yeah, I use Thaco. Let's see, I think I'm going to be talking about... Okay, a little later I'm going to talk about pre-gens. And one of the things I have on my pre-gens is I have all their saving throws, because I keep a copy of who's got what. I actually have it on a piece of like Bristol board, heavy cardstock, and I have all the pre-gens that are available, and then I just notate the ones that are in use. I have their Thaco, and I have all their saving throws. So it's not happened yet, but I expect sometimes somebody will either make a mistake or try to fudge, and so it doesn't happen. And I just tell them what they need to hit. And if they and I put Thaco on their character sheet. I put it. So if they know what it is, fine. If they don't, they can ask the guy next to them. I put it on there as an aid. If their Thaco's 14 and they roll a 16 and don't hit, well, that tells them something. If they roll an 11 and hit, that helps. Because I don't give anything you run into my dungeons or into my Wheel of Blame or anything, don't expect it to be standard straight out of the book. Oh, no. That would be a bad supposition. Okay, in modern gamer experience, rolling for perception rather than players grilling the DM for info on a room or space seems to be common. Do you think this form of play randomizes fun, taking away from the experience by replacing role-playing with die rolling? What do you do to encourage players to find the hooks or clue you have in your scenarios, especially if the players are stuck and can't seem to pick up the clue you want them to get? Pardon me. Yeah, doesn't that just frustrate you as a DM when you're sending thought waves, go left, go left, go left, and for some inexplicable reason they decide to go right, and anyway, yeah, we all know that one, DMs. I don't like rolling for perceptions. Not perceptions. No. I encourage play, and I do it in the Wheel of Blame, and I do it in any other game I run. I encourage someone to be responsible for checking for doors and traps, and someone to be certain people to be responsible. When I'm running an adventure that I know is going to be an overnight, before it even goes, I tell them to set up a watch schedule. Who's going to be sleeping when? Now, in a game, in a convention, I condense the effects of sleep in that they get a lot more back in the convention game than they would in that many hours, probably in a campaign. But I do that for the convention game that is compressing a lot of play into just a few hours. I don't like the way the game went, and I understand that Gary went this way too, where you walk in a room and roll a handful of dice, and you're told what your dice rolls reveal to you. I don't mind as a DM. I encourage the groups to ask questions. Now, not all 7 of them at once, but hey, one at a time, ask questions. Who's looking for secret panels and whatever? Okay, again, I got my chart. I know everybody's skills and abilities. You find it, you don't. Whatever. I don't like perception rolls. No, I like active participation, active keeping your eyes open, and it's more role-playing when you have to keep thinking about those things. Who's doing what? Who's watching behind? Who's listening ahead? Assign it if they can't decide who's going to do it. That'll get them involved in the role-playing. When they don't get the clue that I want them to get, especially at a convention game, when they're just seemingly walking around like a bunch of perception-impaired penguins, bumping into things, I generally do something spur on the moment. I don't have any one given ploy that always works. Though I do have one element that I use frequently, and that's scorn. And if they just, with as heavy scorn dripping voice as I can muster, if only someone had looked under so-and-so. And I hand them the clue on a plate. But they are usually chagrined enough by the scorn I heap on them that they get the message and I had fun. Didn't belittle them, I just heaped a big shovel full of scorn. Okay. All right. This says, Tim, I recall years ago, Gary said that the best optimized party, if a player was of 4 players, was a fighter slash thief, fighter slash wizard, cleric, and wizard. This must have been I can only surmise that without seeing the question, this was an answer to. Number one, I'm surprised by the multi-classes. Unless that's something that Gary got more into later on. That doesn't jibe with the Gary that I knew when we were doing what we were doing, actively discouraging multi-classes by making it so difficult. For example, look at the Bard. I don't know. I didn't read every single thing he wrote on Dragon's Foot, nor do I ever care to. No malicious reason. I just have more important things to do. He can't remember. You can't remember where it was cited, but the composition optimized frontline fighting and access to plenty of magic, and of course the thieving ability. Do you have an optimized group of pre-gens you run for Wheel of Blame, or a favorite combination of player classes? I allow a lot of choice in the Wheel of Blame. I have 10 pre-gens. I can run up to 7 players through the Wheel of Blame format, and I have 10 pre-gens. Heavy on fighters. There's a cleric that I recommend that they take because he's the medic, obviously. And there is a magic user that I don't recommend taking except in the largest of parties, because he becomes a liability. Because even though they're 3rd, 4th, 5th level, he's pretty much a liability. Now, I have 2 sets of pre-gens I use. I use the 3rd, 4th, 5th level, the 3 to 5s, for the Wheel of Blame. Make people realize that they don't have an inexhaustible supply of hit points and have to think their way through rather than bull rush, bully, whatever. I have a second set that I use when I'm running one of the adventures I've written that I used to run at cons, and those are 9, 10, 11. I think there might even be a 12th in there. Again, I have a set, and I put them down on the table. With those high-level ones, I don't generally interfere. With the lower-level ones, I feel, let's all have a little more fun with a little better. I don't tell them which ones. I just say, except for in the case of the cleric. And I don't tell them any of the others. I don't promote any of the others as being better or worse. In the Wheel of Blame, you're going to be doing more fighting than spell flinging anyway, because it's set up more for thinking and fighting, not standing back and calling in the mortars. And it makes it easier for me. So there's that. In the bigger pre-gens, there's there's a thief in both sets. A couple in the larger set. I think there's 12. I haven't run them for so long. I think I might have 12 pre-gens in what I call the big characters. And I learned long time ago, much to my chagrin, that you never put an alignment down anywhere on the sheet. Because if you do, then if you put down the normal alignments. A thief would usually be chaotic neutral, and players will use that to steal from each other, lie to the party. Oh, I'm just playing my role. So you don't put that down and put ideas in their head. Bad idea. I don't put alignments down anymore. We don't go there. Just no. It's just not that good of an idea to go into that. Just let them assume they're all neutrals. You got to get along, because if the group doesn't do well, some or all of you ain't going home. Okay. And this was a follow-up after this, and I don't know if the second one was in response to the first, and then there's a follow-on to it. So we'll go here. How do you feel about player betrayal? I'm interested to hear how the players role play a disparate group of cons, avowed thieves. Reminds me of player explained that in his RPG group, the PCs constantly cheated, fragged, and betrayed each other, but the players remained the best of friends in real life. So I guess it's possible to have fun and screw each other over on the same time. Oh, yeah. My every other Wednesday night group of board game friends who also can and have role played, we screw each other over all the time. And we're best friends in real life. I know members of a former group of role players that did the most heinous things to each other, that if I were to describe them, the bad people would get on me for going there. And they all still remain best friends. They did heinous and less vicious and weird stuff to each other on a routine basis. Now, player betrayal is a funny thing, because I don't know how, if you have a thief who regularly behaves like a thief and steals stuff from everybody in the party that plays week after week after session, how you keep harmony in there. Because, I'm sorry, if you're going to be a role player, you're not going to go, oh, well, that's just what he does, so I'll let him steal from me. It's going to cause animosity. It's definitely going to cause animosity. Putting a thief in a one-off at a con is one thing. They don't have enough time to become little sleazeballs. There's no harm in being an honorable thief, especially if you, in your campaign, are a group of adventuring fellows, a fellowship, if you will. You don't steal from each other. Now, once I was running a request for a group of all ex-cons but one. And I gave them pre-gens that they had to play, including a paladin. And I made the paladin be a paladin. When the paladin wanted to do heinous stuff not even an anti-paladin would have thought about doing, we had a very interesting battle of wills, literally standing up against, almost touching foreheads with each other. And I prevailed and made him behave like a paladin, which made the rest of the group quit being such jerks and nasty, evil people. So it was fun setting one of them as the stick wielder to all his friends who he's used to playing with like that. We all had a great time that night, and we still speak to each other, so it's all cool. Player betrayal. Yeah, you can do it. Now, following on that, that's why the programs... Okay, so he's talking about his pre-gens. That's why the pre-gens are neutral. With the toughest fighter thief neutral, neutral good to keep the rest of the gang on a somewhat straight and narrow. It's a heavy teamwork-oriented adventure where direct combat is best to be avoided. I have all of them as thief variants primarily for the suspense of subterfuge, ubiquitous class participation, and importance of group stealth. Well, there you're using combinations that, okay, why you're doing that is okay. It's an interesting idea, an interesting shade to put your campaign through. Running high-level PCs is silly. But he defines high-level as 10 plus. They have a ton of gold and experience and regional influence. You retire the PC and start a new PC. That's what we said in the very first three. I didn't even say it. Gary and Dave said it in the very first 3 books. It's like asking Conan, king of Aquilonia, to run through dungeons. Great point and an example, and from Appendix N, ties it all together. He's a king, his emphasis. Why would he? No king would. It's just the power gamers looking for ever more power, a.k.a. GM headache. I've never ran high-level PCs for this reason. Now, we had a discussion a week or 2 ago about DMs supposedly saying that they can't DM over level 8. Now, I don't want to get into a pissing contest here, but this excerpt is stretchy. Because I was talking, I believe I said something about bullshit or, and it starts with, not BS. I had hundreds of convention DMs admit this to me. They cannot handle the game beyond level 8. Facts are a stubborn thing like me. Not saying you're wrong, but you're not talking about the majority of DMs. Hundreds of convention DMs have all told you this. Now I'm trying to think of just how many conventions you'd had to go to do this and what a percentage of each of these DMs you'd have to talk to. Now, before the pandemic, I was going to 5 conventions a year. I wouldn't have had time to speak to of those aggregate hundreds of DMs. So I think you may be stretching your point here just a little bit. You may have had a lot of them in your estimation, but hundreds? I go to 5 conventions a year. There's not the opportunity to speak to hundreds of DMs. Unless you drop a little comment box somewhere. Hey, DMs, tell me. Come on, man. They cannot handle the game. That's kind of unpleasant. In fact, all right. I've ran D&D for close to 30 years. Okay. Here we go. 30 years. If you were especially fortunate and you went to a big con, a regional con, and a couple of small cons every year for 30 years, you'd still have trouble coming up with hundreds of DMs that feel this way. Your facts, your numbers don't support it. And no, we're not going to talk about this again after tonight. That's why I don't name names. You claim to have run over 1,000 sessions in your first 4 years. Wow. 250 sessions a year for 4 years. Apparently you didn't have a job. You weren't going to school. With 365 days in the year and you running 250 sessions, even if you were running them twice a day, 120. Come on, man, these numbers are I could DM to the highest level players. Loved it. I was a public who DM'd for hundreds of people at that point. There again, hundreds of people. There's a couple of people from Frog God Games that run games for 25 people at a time at the cons I've been to. Those are the biggest games I've seen routinely run. No largest number of players. They might have seen hundreds of players. Come on, man. All right. That's enough of that. Like I said, we're not going there again. Now I'm going to address something that I have been thinking about for a while that I find very offensive, that I take umbrage at with exception to. And that's this crappy disclaimer crap that the Wizards is publishing. I'll read part of it. I'll quote it. I cut and pasted it. We, Wizards, recognize that some of the legacy content available on the website does not reflect the values of the D&D franchise today. Some older content may reflect ethnic, racial, and gender prejudice that were commonplace in American society at that time. These depictions were wrong then and are wrong today. This content is presented as it was originally created, because to do otherwise would be the same as claiming those prejudices, that's a good one, never existed. Dungeons & Dragons teaches that the diversity is a strength, and we strive to make our D&D products as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This part of our work will never end. Woo! Trumpets. Harp music. Well, may reflect a... Here we go again. We're talking about that English teacher that just can't let you read a story and enjoy it. He's got to pick it to death and put together his hidden meanings and what he thinks the symbolism is. People today are taking the lens of almost 50 years of societal change, and if you don't think that the past 50 years of societal change aren't the most profound change of any 50-year period you could find in our history, except maybe the 50 years that steam came in, or the 50 years that the loom was new, find something more profound that has changed our society, because now we're talking about communications. And everybody gets to share their opinions everywhere around the world. So now people want to go and they want to analyze what we did 50 years ago, or nearly 50 years ago. They want to analyze what we did. Well, we must be evil people because it was an evil society back then, so therefore we must have put evil things in here. I find it especially offensive in the sense that, and I'm not going to virtue signal here, it's not what this is. I find it especially offensive because a good portion of my family are people of color. The new, safe, sanitized terminology. And they are absolutely correct in thinking that we didn't include them at the beginning. Well, we did. D&D got its start from white college kids, white college guys, who went to game conventions, learned new games, and took them home and taught them to their white college friends. That's the way D&D started. ugly truth? Were there some people of color in some of the groups that it got taught to? Probably. Very, very few, because wargaming back then was a thing white guys did. Not because we didn't want black guys to do it. I don't believe. I think it just worked out that way. Did I write adventures thinking that a certain race in D&D was the equivalent of a certain race in real life? No. Never dawned on us. It's only the people now, the new interpretationists, that want to go back and see what we wrote back then and declaim us as evil, when actually, I may sound a little hubristic here, actually, you'll find that a high percentage of the early gamers were really quite liberal in their viewpoints. Really quite liberal. And liberal at this time meant embracing civil rights. And we did. To say that we made depictions in the early games is insulting. I can't think of a single person that wrote anything of significance up to and including first edition Dungeons and Dragons that was in any way misogynist or racist. Now, Gary got into this genetic determinism stuff, and there's been an argument about, it was sexist because women couldn't be as strong as men. Well, in real life, that's true. But hey, if this is fantasy, if you want to be as strong as a man, who cares? If I'd had a woman get into the game back in the day and say, I want to be as strong, well, okay, it's fantasy. I've never had an understanding of the people that seem to forget that one underlying tenet that ties us all together. It's fantasy. But to say that we, and I consider myself one of those we's, were racist? No. If we were sexist, to what degree varied, and we're a product of our upbringing. As everybody gets older, they learn better things. That's as far as I'll go with that one. We tried to be as inclusive as we could. Some of the splat books and some of the things that were written as products, Oriental Adventures, etc., we were trying to find. I won't say that, because I wasn't there then. I won't say that tried to draw in more people of Asian descent, but it was an effort to reach out and show it's not just about white guys from the Middle Ages. I think WotC owes all of us old farts an apology or a clarification of some sort. They're reading in depictions that weren't there. They were not there. To say they were is to say that every one of us at the early TSR was a racist, misogynist, sexist individual. Each of us are human. Each of us had our own ideas. Gary, in his and some of his genetic inevitability stuff, he was not wrong in that he was quoting some of the more controversial, maybe or not, but contemporary. There was a lot of stuff going on in the 40s and 50s about how strong women could be. The Russians were pumping their females full of stuff and coming to the Olympics in the 50s. They were just, they were supersized superhumans. All of us were products of our time. I'm not apologizing. I'm simply explaining. I've never written knowingly anything that I feel anybody needs to apologize for, Watsy or myself. I don't think any of us did. Various of the people in TSR had their own personal hang-ups. Most of them are regarding dead people, and so I don't need to go into them. But other than, well, there was a case in the art department where somebody's misogynism made a gross error. But that's a personnel hiring thing, not a game design thing. I've nattered on about this long enough. Game holes coming up. Can't wait, can't wait, can't wait. Dodata Gobi.
Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when the rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Tight with tramp under a tree, high as could be.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Curmudgeon.